Hello and welcome back. This is Birth of a Myth 3, and if you're new to this series is based on the book Founding Myth by Andrew Seidel. I am so excited about this episode because we finally, now that we are done with a lot of the historical base, are ready to get to the fun stuff. Today we are talking about the Constitution versus the Bible, and I have been so waiting to use this clip because today we are talking about
why this country was definitely not founded on any of the damn commandments.
I'm Godless Granny. Let's have a chat. Hello and welcome to episode 3. As you can see, I'm trying a few new things here. One of my viewers commented that the acoustics were not the best in the room that I was working in, and so I'm trying working in a different room that's much smaller. I think the acoustics might be better in here. Please leave a comment in the comment section and let me know if this works out a little bit better acoustics-wise. The lighting is very different in here than it was in the room that I was using. It's not quite as good, and so if the acoustics are better, I'll bring some more lights into this room, but if it's not any better, then I'll go back to using the room that I was using because there's better lighting in there. I got the new hairstyle. Yeah, I tend to wear my hair a little bit longer in the winter and a little shorter in the summer, and I know some of you are still experiencing some real winter weather, those of you who live in the north, but down here in Alabama, it's getting rather spring-like, and so I was ready for a change for spring. I also want to apologize for mispronouncing Mr. Seidel's name. As one of my viewers pointed out, I've been saying Seidel, and that is not correct. It's actually Seidel, and I thank you for the correction because I do want to be as accurate as possible. Okay, today we are going to first look at an overall view of how the Bible does not reflect the founding documents of our country, and then we're going to get more into the specifics of the Ten Commandments of the Bible versus the Bill of Rights. So first of all, an overall view. Christian nationalists claim that the three branches of government that we have are based on the Trinity, that because there were three members of the Trinity and we have three branches of government, that was taken directly from that, and that is one of the things they point to as being a indication that our government was intended to be founded on the Bible. And specifically, they point to Isaiah 33:22 as giving us this triune government. The passage reads, "For the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king. It is he who will save us." They point to the three sections of Lord as being judge, king, and lawgiver, as being the basis for us having a separation of our legislative, judicial, and executive branches. However, even though the Bible talks about these three roles within God, it also gives all of the roles to the one God. It does not separate them among three different persons. It's not like God the Father had one role and God the Holy Spirit had another role. In fact, the passage itself makes it quite clear that all of these three roles belong to the one person. He puts forth his own plan for worldwide sovereignty. The idea of a separation of powers into separate branches of government actually came from Federalist number 47, quoting Montesquieu. "This is the basis for our separation of powers, not the Bible." Second major difference between the Bible and the Constitution is the Bible is unchanging. Christian nationalists will be very quick to point out that their God is an unchanging God. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. However, the Constitution was specifically written not to be unchanging. It was intended to be a framework that could be modified. The Founding Fathers recognized that times change and laws change and ideas change. And because of those changes, we needed a framework that we could work within, but make changes when ideas did change. For example, the right to vote for women. When the Constitution was founded, women couldn't vote. But we realize now that women are just as much a part of society as men are. We are equally people, and we should be able to vote as well. And that was one thing that our Constitution allowed for, was change, modification through amendments. Christian nationalists tell us that our Constitution is based on the Golden Rule, and the Golden Rule is found in the Bible. And there is a little bit of truth to this saying, because there is a basis for the Golden Rule within the Bible. However, the Golden Rule really is not a Judeo-Christian idea. It is spelled out in the Old Testament, but when it was used in the Old Testament, it applied only to God's chosen people, the Hebrew people. The Hebrew people were to do unto other Hebrew people as they would have done to them. But you could do whatever you wanted to everybody else, including murder. It really didn't matter. And while Jesus did change the rule to include other people in the idea of neighbor, when he gave the parable of the Good Samaritan, he indicated that your neighbor was everyone. But this idea did not originate with Jesus. Almost every society and every religion has some form of the Golden Rule. Andrew Seidel, in his book, gives 13 sources where the Golden Rule is cited prior to the life of Jesus, dating back to as early as 2,000 years before Jesus was born. So the Golden Rule is most definitely not a Christian idea. And the Jewish form of the Golden Rule was not all-inclusive as the Constitution is. And so the Golden Rule of equality to all is most definitely not a Judeo-Christian idea. Another reason we know that our Constitution is not based on the Bible is because the Bible is based on fear and obedience. And the Constitution is based on the idea that we do not need to fear our government. Our government gets its power from the people, and the people have a right to redress their grievances against the government. Try to find that idea in the Bible. When we get to the area of crime and punishment, we find the greatest divergence from biblical ideas. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights are based on a system of personal responsibility. If one commits a crime, one is responsible to pay for that crime. The Bible is full of examples where instead of personal responsibility, God holds vicarious responsibility. In fact, vicarious responsibility is the entire plan of salvation of the New Testament. Okay, first of all, vicarious punishment. We see this in the second commandment, where God says he will punish, too, the third and fourth generation. That innocent people who never claim to disbelieve in him will be punished for the sins of their grandparents or great-grandparents. And second, we see innocent people being punished for sin in numerous places in the Bible. Look at Noah's flood. A lot of Christians say, well, they were all unrighteous because the Bible says that Noah was the only righteous person. But clearly there were certainly people who were children at the time, and they were not guilty of any offenses against God, but they perished in the flood as well. We also look at what happened in the Bible in Egypt when Moses came to Pharaoh and asked that his people be let go. When the 10th plague came, all the firstborn of the Egyptians were killed. There was nothing to indicate that any of them had committed any offense against God. They were not the ones that were holding the Hebrews as slaves. Of course, the whole story of Moses and the Hebrews and the slaves isn't true anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But the point is that our Constitution isn't based on this. The Bible punishes the innocent all the time. On pages 140 to 141 of Seidel's book, he enumerates places where God clearly indicates that he is punishing the innocent with the guilty. The Bible is not based on personal responsibility. And second, the Bible is based on substitutional atonement, the whole story of Jesus dying for the sins of the people. The people are not held responsible for the sins that they have committed, but rather they are forgiven simply by believing in the sacrifice that God gave him. This is not our system of government. One cannot walk into a court of law, claim to be guilty, and then say, okay, I'll let somebody else take the punishment for me. Dark Matter 2525 once did a video on this that is hilarious. I will have a link to that video in the description. Another difference between the biblical view of crime and punishment and our constitutional crime and punishment is the Eighth Amendment forbids cruel and unusual punishment. However, the Bible allows the death penalty for even minor offenses. The Bible advocates the death penalty for working on the Sabbath. Even an activity as small as picking up sticks on Saturday could get you the death penalty. The Bible advocates the death penalty for blasphemy, for disobedient children, and even for a woman who doesn't scream while being raped. The God of the universe, this omniscient person, could not foresee that someone that is raping a woman might be holding a knife to her throat and telling her that if she screams, he's going to kill her. And if she fails to scream, she's subject to the death penalty. Another major difference between the Bible and our system of government is the presumption of innocence. Our Constitution clearly says that one is presumed innocent until one is found guilty. However, the Bible says that everyone is guilty because of original sin. Because of the sin of Adam, everyone was cursed, and so we are all born guilty sinners. There is a presumption of guilt until you can be found innocent through redemption. Benjamin Franklin, when he expressed his ideas on crime and punishment, clearly rejected that. He said, "It is better for 100 guilty persons to escape than for one innocent person to suffer." The God of the Bible clearly disagrees. Another area where the Bible disagrees with the Constitution is in the area of torture. The Eighth Amendment to the Constitution clearly prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. However, the Bible not only allows torture, but even celebrates it. The crucifixion was torture. Crucifixion was a Roman form of punishment that was intended to be a lengthy process, a public process, so that all could see the torture that the person was going through in an attempt to deter anyone else from committing the same crime. And yet, Christians today all wear crosses as their symbol. They put crosses on their churches. And this is a symbol of torture, definitely contrary to our forbidding of cruel and unusual punishment. Finally, the Bible's endorsement of cruel and unusual punishment extends to having eternal punishment for every crime. It doesn't matter what you did. You murdered, the punishment is eternity in hell forever. You were guilty of stealing, the punishment is eternity in hell forever. You are guilty of thinking that you were angry with someone. You're guilty of murder, and the punishment is burning in hell forever. The punishment is the same no matter what the crime. Our judicial system is not based on this. Our judicial system says that the punishment should fit the crime. If you commit a minor infraction, then you have a fine, not eternity in prison. Another reason we know that the Bible is not the basis of our laws is because Article 6 of the Constitution says that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and that the basis of that law is government of the people. Religious beliefs do not take precedence. The people are the source of the power, not a God. Another way we see that the Bible is not the foundation of our government is because of the form of government that we have. In the Bible, a number of governments were formed, and they are all theocratic monarchies, whereas our Constitution built our government on the idea of a republic. The republic was a Greek idea. Which government we had was determined by reason and by debate. It was not handed down to us from on high. It was thought out and discussed. It was not prayed over. and revealed. The founders studied the classics. They were also well familiar with Judeo-Christian ideas. They relied on the former and shunned the latter. Seidel quotes, and I hope I pronounce her name correctly, Ruth Hermance Green, who said, "There was a time when religion ruled the world. It is known as the Dark Ages." And now finally we come to
the damn commandments.
the first question we have to ask ourselves is, if we're going to say that the Constitution was based on the Ten Commandments, which ones? There were 4 different sets of commandments that God gave down. Moses went up on the mountain and he was given the first set of 10 commandments, supposedly from God, which supposedly were written in his own hand. And he came down, and when he saw the Israelites and saw them worshiping the golden calf, he smashed them. Now, this is questionable for a number of reasons. First, while he was on the mountain, God told him that the people were down there worshiping the golden calf. So when he saw it, it shouldn't have been any surprise to him. Second, the commandment to worship only God hadn't been given to them yet. How were they supposed to know that God alone was to be worshipped? So why was he so surprised when he got there? So surprised that he destroyed the only evidence that has ever been given to this world that there is actually the existence of a God. It sounds like a rather suspicious story when the only time God's ever actually revealed himself in something that was permanent and long-lasting was destroyed by his own followers. Oh well, so Moses goes back up the mountain, gets another set of 10 commandments, and brings these down. And when we read the first set and the second set, they don't exactly agree. The 10th commandment in the first set was about coveting, and the 10th commandment in the second set was, do not boil a goat in its mother's milk. That was so important that it made the list of rules for all people of all time. The third set of the 10 Commandments came when Moses was retelling the story of how he got the first set. But when he listed the 10 Commandments in the third set, it doesn't exactly match the set that was in the Bible the first time it told the story. And the fourth set is Moses making a set in stone, but this one is quite different from the first 3. The first 3 had lists of thou shalts and thou shalt nots, but the fourth set was all a set of cursing. Cursed is the one who does this, and cursed is the one who does that. And so our 4 sets of 10 Commandments really are all quite different. If you look at the sets that are used today, the Catholic Church uses one set. The Protestant and Orthodox churches use a second set. But the Jewish people use something different entirely. Even though they are the original people who received the 10 Commandments, they don't consider the 10 Commandments to be special. They instead use the 613 rules called, and I hope I pronounce this correctly because I'm sorry, I've only seen this word in print and I've never heard it pronounced, but I believe it is the mitzvot. And the rules that are included in the mitzvot include a prohibition against mixing fabrics, a prohibition against eating shellfish, and a long list of what a woman must do and not do while she is menstruating. I covered this much more thoroughly in my video called Does Laurie Alexander Have Shoes? It's quite humorous if you're interested in seeing it. On pages 164 through 168, Andrew Seidel contrasts the different sets of the 10 Commandments, every one of which would be unconstitutional in the United States. I'll go through them in detail. Because the sets of 10 Commandments differ, I'm going to be using the Protestant and Orthodox set of 10 Commandments. The Catholic set is a little bit different, but not excessively so. It's more different in the numbering system than anything else. The first commandment says that I am the Lord your God, and you shall have no other. A clear violation of the First Amendment. The First Amendment allows us the freedom to practice any religion we choose and does not allow the government to dictate a religion to us. The Second Commandment prohibits the use of imagery. It says that you shall not make for yourself an idol, but it goes much further than that. It says you shall not make an image of anything that walks on the earth, basically banning almost all artwork. The only artwork that is permissible is things that are not created by God. You will find in Orthodox Jewish synagogues that they do follow this, having only geometric shapes for artwork and no depictions of things in nature or people. But Christians obviously violate this commandment every day, especially artists. And this again is a clear violation of the First Amendment, which allows for not only freedom of religion, but freedom of expression. One is permitted under our Constitution to express themselves verbally or through artwork, a violation of the Second Commandment. The Third Commandment prohibits blasphemy, an expression of speech. This also is clearly a violation of the First Amendment. It's also typical of a totalitarian form of government. Totalitarian governments punish more harshly crimes against the government than they do crimes against other people. We see that exact thing going on in the Bible, which punishes crimes against God, the giver of the law, much more harshly than crimes between people, crimes that have actual victims here on earth. A second problem with the prohibition of blasphemy under U.S. law is that under our law, it would be void for vagueness. Void for vagueness is a legal construct that makes it illegal to pass laws that people don't know what they are. The most common laws that are thrown out as being void for vagueness are vagrancy laws, because they are unclear as to what someone is allowed to do under them. Is standing and reading a newspaper illegal under a vagrancy law? Is it illegal to stand on the sidewalk for a certain amount of time? What if you're waiting for a bus? If you can't understand what the law is prohibiting, then the law is void for vagueness. And this is a problem with the blasphemy law, because it's not just the wording, but it's the inflection. For example, if I were to say, Jesus Christ, that clearly is not blasphemy. And yet if I said, Jesus Christ, that would be considered blasphemy. And I've said the same words in both times. It's only the inflection that changes. And how do you write a law that prohibits a particular inflection? Obviously, what they were trying to prohibit was anything that would criticize God. And that is most definitely a foundation of our government. Not that you can't criticize God, but that you can. And not only can you criticize God, you can criticize the government, you can criticize anyone you want. The only limitation is that you can't threaten someone. And as long as all you are doing is criticizing the person for their ideas, you're free to do so under our form of government. This is the basis of our Constitution, not some rules against blasphemy. The Fourth Commandment prohibits violation of the Sabbath, and Christian nationalists do point to this as being something that is founded in some of our laws, because we have had blue laws, laws that prohibit the selling of certain products, particularly liquor, on Sundays. There's been Sunday closing laws, and these seem to support the idea that there should be a Sabbath and we should protect the Sabbath and keep it holy. However, when the Supreme Court was asked this very question, the Supreme Court has upheld blue laws, but they said it is not for religious reasons. It's not because they are wanting to protect the Sabbath, but rather they felt it was best for the health and welfare of the people. Working all the time is not good for anyone. Everybody needs a break. And why not on Sunday? They've upheld blue laws as being for the health and welfare of the people, not because they want people to go to church on Sunday, which is what Christian nationalists would have you believe. The fifth commandment says, honor your parents. And while this might be a good idea, it really is not a basis of our law. There's no differentiation between a child's duty to their parents as opposed to any other person. The real purpose of the commandment to honor your parents is to perpetuate the faith. The parents are supposed to be teaching the commandments of God to their children, and thus if a child is unruly and rebellious and is not accepting the instruction of the parent, the penalty is the parent is supposed to put them to death, and you find no such influence as this in American law. Children are perfectly free to accept or reject whatever their parents believe and choose their own beliefs for themselves. I'm going to deal with Commandments 6, 8, and 9 together, as they are all very similar. These deal with do not murder, do not steal, and do not bear false witness. These come the closest to having American law based on them, because we most definitely do have laws against murder, stealing, and perjury. But the Ten Commandments were not the basis of these laws. These laws are common in every society. These are more ideas that are common to any people that wants to associate with one another because they are good for the well-being of the people. Second, the law of killing really isn't taken seriously by Jewish people or Christians at all. As George Carlin pointed out, just think about Irish history, the Middle East, the Crusades, the Inquisition, and our own abortion doctor killings, to see how seriously religious people take "thou shalt not kill." Apparently, to religious folks, especially the truly devout, murder is negotiable. It depends on who's doing the killing and who's getting killed. The Bible clearly says that killing is okay as long as you don't kill members of your own religious group. And so, no, our do not murder is not based on the Bible, because in the United States, killing is wrong, period. It doesn't matter who you kill, you just don't do it. At the time that the Ten Commandments were written, writing was in its infancy and punctuation was not in existence. And so the 6th through the 9th commandments were actually written as one sentence, which read, "Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor." Thy neighbor modified the entire passage, not just the prohibition against bearing false witness, so that a more accurate rendition of the text would be, "Thou shalt not murder thy neighbor, thou shalt not commit adultery against thy neighbor," etc., because of this tribe mentality. And this tribe mentality of favoring fellow believers over non-believers continues into our modern day. For example, on May 23rd, 1954, just 1 week after the Supreme Court handed down the decision of Brown versus Board of Education, Reverend Kerry Daniel gave a sermon entitled "God the Original Segregationist." Bob Jones, University founder and evangelist, gave a sermon in 1960 on Easter Sunday in which he said, "If you are against segregation and against racial separation, you are against God." In 2018, the Washington Post followed a small Alabama church doing a series on the Ten Commandments. It reported on the conversation between two congregants, Trump supporters, and their understanding of the sermon. It reported that love thy neighbor meant love thy American neighbor. Welcome the stranger meant the legal immigrant stranger. The Bible says if you do this to the least of these, you do it to me. But the least of these are Americans. Christian nationalists would have you believe that only Americans are deserving of the protections of the Bible. This is clearly not what our law is based on. This is clearly not an idea of equal justice for all. Our nation doesn't always get it right. We didn't allow women to vote until fairly recently. We kept Black people as slaves until just 160 years ago. And even after we abolished slavery, it was another 100 years before we finally granted civil rights to Black people. And today we see people of the LGBTQ plus community fighting for equal rights again. For this reason, I am not going to cover the seventh commandment today. I'm going to save that for next week so we can spend a little extra time on that. I would like to conclude this episode with another quote from Mr. Seidel's book. The ideal that America is attempting to live up to is the non-biblical principle inscribed on the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., equal justice under law. Whereas the immutable, imperfect law of the Judeo-Christian God will forever discriminate against people who don't believe in the right God, American law comes ever closer to attaining the equality ideal. So thank you for joining me. Next week we will conclude this series, and until then, live your life.